Hello, Adab, and Namaste. I'm Nadia Khan, and on behalf of the DC South Asian Arts Council, welcome to the first DC South Asian Literary Festival from May 9th through 15th, 2021. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to express our support and concern for the difficulties that everyone is going through due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Our thoughts and prayers are with you. We have a donation button on our website, and all funds raised will be donated to COVID relief. Please review our website, DCSAACI.org, where you can also see our schedule and register for any of our events. Thank you to all of our hosts, moderators, and guest speakers for your time and participation. We look forward to the conversation and panel discussions tonight. For our session tonight, the moderator will be Niharika Chibber Joe. Ms. Joe is the Deputy Director of the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission, an independent federal agency that supports research, education, and exchange with Japan. She is also an award-winning published poet and short story writer. Niharika speaks several languages and writes in English as well as Japanese and Hindi. She holds a master's in Japanese language and literature from the Jawaharlal Nehru University in India. She also holds a master's in international economics and Japan studies from Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies here in Washington, D.C. Niharika, thank you for accepting our invitation and moderating tonight's session. I would like to turn it over to Niharika now.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Namaskar, everybody, and greetings from Washington, D.C. My name is Niharika, and I'm very delighted to be here and honored to be moderating this conversation amongst our illustrious poets tonight. Many thanks to the DC South Asian Arts Council for inviting me, and many congratulations to the entire team for putting on this event. We see you, we recognize the hard work that's gone into this, and we really appreciate what you're doing. Especially a big shout out to Snigdha Somani, who's running this behind the scenes and making sure that everything happens seamlessly. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in from around the world for waking up early. I know some of you have woken up very early, friends and family who are here. Thank you so much. Before I begin introducing our illustrious panel, I would also like to hold space to acknowledge the acute suffering in the pandemic and what's continuing to wreak havoc around the world, especially in India, where a loved one is being lost nearly every moment. But the arts allow us to keep hope alive, to sublimate our feelings, and to know that the sun will be up again tomorrow. Through troubled times, we learn of heroic stories and those of resilience happening simultaneously. It is in this spirit of hope and resilience that I'm delighted to introduce our distinguished guests. They are all immigrants to the United States, having arrived here as early as the 1950s and as recently as the mid-2000s. The act of immigration in and of itself being one of resilience and entrepreneurship. They left behind all that was theirs and that was familiar to begin with, and established their lives in another country, speaking another language that wasn't their mother tongue. They are strong, they're tenacious, they're resilient, they're poets, and they are all lifelong cultural ambassadors. I now have the distinct honor of introducing our panel to begin our discussion on why language matters in poetry. Going by the order on my screen, we have Dr. Meenakshi Mohan. Dr. Mohan is an art critic, children's writer, painter, and poet. She has taught at universities in Chicago, Boston, and more recently, Towson University in Maryland. She's widely published, and her paintings have graced book covers. She's been listed twice in the Who is Who Among American Teachers and is on the editorial team for Inquiry and Education, a peer-reviewed journal. Welcome, Dr. Mohan. Next, we have Dr. Natwar Gandhi, who retired in January 2014 from his long tenured position as Chief Financial Officer of the District of Columbia, where he was responsible for Washington, D.C.'s finances, including its approximately $12 billion in annual operating and capital funds. Though an accountant by profession, Dr. Gandhi has published 3 volumes of poetry and an autobiography in Gujarati, his native tongue. He has also published his memoir in English entitled Still the Promised Land. Welcome, Dr. Gandhi. And now, Ms. Panna Naik, a distinguished Gujarati poet and well-known writer who has been active in the Gujarati literary space for nearly 40 years. She has written several volumes of path-breaking poetry and short stories and has given a distinct voice to Indian women as evidenced by her worldwide following. Her poetry has been widely recognized and awarded Gujarati literary establishments prizes both in India and the United States. Recently, she published The Astrologer's Sparrow, a volume of poetry in English. Welcome, Panaji. Next, we have Mr. Surinder Dio. Mr. Deol is an author and a literary translator who has published Sahir Ludhianvi's biography, Sahir, a Literary Portrait. Working with India's leading Urdu scholar, Professor Gopi Chand Narang, Mr. Deol has published translations of Urdu poets such as Ghalib and Mir Taki Mir, and several others. Mr. Deol published a book of poems called A Moment in the Universe in 2006, and a novel entitled Endless Life in 2012. He has an upcoming book, which he will tell us about later tonight, hopefully. Welcome, Surinderji. And finally, Dr. Afsar Mohammad, a celebrated poet and literary critic in Telugu and English. He has published more than 10 books of poetry and literary criticism, along with a monograph, The Festival of Peers, Popular Islam and Shared Devotion in South India. He will tell us about his upcoming book too later on this program. He currently teaches in the Department of South Asian Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. Welcome, Afsar. In preparing for this discussion, I was reminded of the fact that as South Asians, we are all polyglots. At the very least, we are bilingual. We speak at least 2 languages fluently. So then the question becomes, what is the significance of language in poetry? Does it matter? If so, why does it matter? Do we need to know the words in order to feel the emotion? How do we know to express ourselves more powerfully in one language rather than in another? I have asked our panelists to take not more than 5 minutes each to tell us how they get their language on and why that matters. In doing so, I have also asked them to share bits of their work to help illustrate their point, or to just share because poetry always sounds good. So without much ado, Dr. Mohan, may I ask you to please kick off the discussion?
Sure. Thank you so much, Niharika, and thank you also, Nadia. And also, before I go, I would like to thank Manoj and Geeta for initiating this literary program. This is really such a big thing. And I'm really, really honored to be in the company of such distinguished writers and poets here. Okay, before I even answer your question, I would like to tell you, Niharika, that poetry is a personal journey. And there are many factors involved in how we express ourselves in our language. And first is at the micro and macro level, the language that we are born in and like our mother tongue. It's basically the story of nature and nurture. In my case, it is my mother tongue, like is in Hindi, but I grew up in Calcutta, so I was exposed to Bengali also. And then, of course, English is my, is adapted language. So I feel comfortable in all, actually, basically, in all 2 languages. I cannot claim so much about Bengali anymore because I've been so much out of touch for a while. My mother has been very good writer, Hindi writer, actually. She published quite a few books, novel, poetry, and everything else. So I kind of grew up, sort of writing from the very early age in Hindi. And then my husband, Kshitij Mohan, has been an excellent writer in English and Hindi, as well as he knew Urdu a lot. So he used Urdu poetry a lot in his writing as well. In fact, after he passed away, I published his book called Tamam Shuddh. It's a combination of, it's all his poems and Hindi and English and Urdu in there. So basically all this kind of impacted, how I sort of grew up writing in both the languages myself, both in Hindi and English. I'm a bilingual writer. Second thing that really affects our writing is the cultural values. Language shows the imagery and the visuals of your culture. In the panelist here, I see a lot of people write in Gujarati, and a lot of them are writing in Urdu and in Telugu. So you can just see their writing there's such a diversity here in our own panelists here. So that plays a big role in what cultural background we come from. And I want to add just one more thing. The more you are exposed to this external environment, the macro environment that I call it, the richer your language becomes, the richer your writing becomes. And the other factor that also sort of affects your writing in poetry is the mood that you are about. Especially I take the moment, for example, some of my poems are very soothing. It's kind of a prayer, prayer kind of thing, especially during these challenging environment that we're going through. I'm trying to find peace through somehow. And second is sometimes my poems are full of rage. My language changes there. When I'm talking about women issues, or I'm talking about Nari Shakti and what happened to Medusa and what happened to, all those things that are happening to women. So it's full of rage. Also, I was very affected by the Black rights movement. So in fact, I wrote quite a few poems around that time also, so they express a different kind of language when I'm writing those. Sometimes I use humor in my writing as well. So language changes. There is a poem that I wrote and that got published in International Writers Journal as well as in one more journal. And it's also going to be a part of an anthology. It's called Chaat Masala. And that's actually I dedicated that poem to my grandson about his mixed identity. And what is chaat masala? Chaat masala is a mixture of this and that. So that's what I said. So I kind of compared him to the chaat masala. So my writing was kind of took more the humorous turn in there. So language keeps changing. The other thing also is very important is the style that you write in. Many people, I believe Dr. Naik, that they said that he writes the whole poem in ballad kind of style. My poem is very free verse, and sometimes they just flow like a story, a story. I use metaphors and symbolism in my poetry also. So that depends. Also, I'm an artist. So many times I use art as is a way of my language also. It's like I paint and then I write poetry based on my art. Sometimes it's just vice versa. I write poetry and then I make my art. So that goes, and that's actually is going to be one of my next project, that I'm going to be working on. So speaking all that, I'm going to share a couple of my poems, one in Hindi and one in English, just a few stanzas of those poems. So you can just see, how all these points that I talked about sort of are relevant in those poems. So one is called, I don't know how many of you can understand Hindi, but, I will just give you the title, I'll translate the title. It's called Mere Papa Ka Wo Purana Rumal. My papa's old handkerchief. It's kind of reminiscing the past life that I have left behind. It's in the same line as ye kagaz ki kashti, ye barish ka pani is kind of the same line, sort of reminiscing my past. So the poem goes on like this. Mere papa ka wo safed sa purana rumal, aaj purani cheezon ke box mein lipta simta mila. सालों पहले की गांठ आज भी लगी थी, खोला तो उसमें हल्दी के कुछ टुकड़े, पीले रंग में धुले चावल और कुछ रुपए आज भी बंधे पड़े थे। वो पुराना किनारे से कुछ फटा सा रुमाल कितनी यादें बिखर गया। फिर विदाई की घड़ियां एक नए सफर का उद्यम, माँ बहन भाई रिश्तेदारों से गले मिलना, अपने आंसुओं को थामे मेरे पापा का वो स्नेह भरा आशीर्वाद मेरे सर को हल्के से सहला गया जैसे कह रहा हो बेटी खुश रहना। आज बरसों बाद न तो वो पीहर की चौखट, न मेरी दादी की कहानियां, कहाँ खो गई मेरी माँ की वो स्नेह भरी मुस्कान, कहाँ है मेरे पापा की वो सौम्य पहचान। मेरे पापा का वो बरसों का पुराना रुमाल, अपनी गांठ में समेटे पुरानी यादें आज भी मेरे पास हैं। And the other one is, so this one is kind of reminiscing my past, about my, something that I found recently. And the other poem is in English. It's called Life, a Book of Verses. In this, I'm trying to, in these challenging times, I'm sort of trying to find my peace. So this is something to do with that. Life is a book of verses, wrapped in melodies of love, glory, and sadness. Between tears and laughs, they weave a story. The symphony of life moves on with unrelenting crescendo, with the sun and moon as our constant companions. In this deciduous journey of life, I see thee in the tears of a child, in the hunger of a poor. I see you in the glory of the sun, in the colors of a rainbow. The eyes of the Lord are in every place. Let your hands hold and guide me. Give me the higher intellect and illuminate my life. Let the verses of my life be the sacred melodies of the Vedas. Karmanye vadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. So basically in my poems, I play my own tunes. I dance to my own tunes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mohan. I think, when you started off saying, Mere Papa ka rumal, and I don't know if people understand Hindi, that is really the point of this discussion. Are you able to present this poem and have the rest of us who are watching, who may or may not understand Hindi, find our eyes going misty? So I am going to move this conversation now to Dr. Gandhi and ask you for your ideas and answers try to answer this question. And then, Pannaji, you're up next.
Thank you, Niharika, and thank you, Manoj and Geeta and Nadia for arranging this wonderful get-together. And I very much appreciate your interest in arts and culture in Washington, D.C. area. My introduction to literature or poetry is rather accidental. I basically came from a village, small village in Western India, where basically it was rather primitive. It had no running water, no electricity, nothing really much to talk about. But we did have a library, a very ramshackle library with few books, and also a teacher of Gujarati literature that really got me into understanding literature. I did not know English at all until I came to Mumbai to go to college. So it was a very hard acquisition for me to be able to learn English at a very late age and then get some kind of proficiency to get through the college in Mumbai. Writing poetry to me is basically a matter of language. I'm reminded of an anecdote that W.H. Auden, the great poet, once had said that if someone comes to me and say, I want to write poetry, I have big things to say, I have a message to give, then Auden would say, I don't have much hope for you. But if someone were to say that I'm interested in words, the play of words, arranging and rearranging words, then I see some future in him. I came to poetry more in terms of love for the language, love for the words, Gujarati words. I don't pretend to say anything. I do not pretend to have a message in my poetry at all. So it is with that I got into writing poems. Again, I'm an accountant by training. So my introduction to literature, particularly poetry, is very structured in that I don't write free verse. I write in Sanskrit meters. I basically write sonnets. As we all know, sonnets are 14 lines, and that's about it. Whatever you have to say or arrange your words has to be in 14 words. So what I'm going to do today is to read one of my sonnets. It's about Gandhiji. He has been my hero ever since I read his autobiography in Gujarati when I was a small boy. Every time I go to India, I make it a point to visit Gandhi's Sabarmati ashram, from where he led his march to the sea in 1932. To me, this ashram is among the holiest places of pilgrimage in India. From its appearance, the ashram is quite a simple and not at all imposing or impressive place. However, from this very ordinary place, he started a revolution that with only about 80 followers and marched to the sea. His message and the method have had profound impact all over the world ever since. I'm going to first read in English for those of us who do not understand Gujarati. So let me read first in English. At the Sabarmati ashram, there is no marble palace here, no imperial lodge, no formidable fortress, no great fort, no tall towers, no army, no armory, no arsenal full of weapons, not even a structure of any architectural significance. There is nothing here really of any consequence. All I see here are few huts. However, it is here that an old man started his campaign to defeat a world power and its mighty army. All he had with him was his walking stick and only a few followers, the happy few. And armed with the power of truth and nonviolence, and God by his side, he challenged that mighty army and said, "Do what you will. I will die a death of a dog, but will not return until I secure freedom for my people. It is do or die for me." The great march that he started here to reach the ocean turned itself into a great ocean, an ocean of revolution that went around the world, conquering hearts and minds of people and their armies on many shores, far and near. Now, Gujarati, it's in a meter, a Sanskrit meter called Prithvi. It's one of the more difficult meters in Sanskrit hierarchy. Ahi nathi jaraj mandir, na mahel mahela tava, na durga nati harme ko, nathi vishishta sapatyava, na haste graha, shastra sangrahana, ashvashala nati, kutir dasabara matra, basajo punga ashrame. અહીં જ કસિકા ચડી કમર હાથ લઈ લાકડી કપાળ કરી ચાંદલો હરિર નામ હોઠે ધરી અમોઘ સતશસ્ત્ર સજ્જ જુજ સાથી સંગે તમે અહીં જ જગુ રાજ્યની સહુ સમર્થ અક્ષોહિણી બુલંદ પડકારીતી કરવું હોય તે લ્યો કરી નથી જ નથી આવવું વિણ સ્વરાજ પાછું હવે ભલે મરણ આવતું મરીશ કાગડા કૂતરા સમાન પણ ના જના પગમુકી શહું આશ્રમે. અહીંથી શરૂ થયું મહાન પ્રસ્થાન જે વિશાળ પ્રસર્યું પછી ઉરે દુરે ચૌદિશે. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gandhi. You know, I grew up a big fan of Mahatma Gandhi as well. And my mother always would tell us that Gandhiji was just one man with a stick and a loincloth, and he changed the world. And so, and I've had a chance to read your poems, but I think as you render them and as you speak them out loud, they carry a different emotion, as did Dr. Mohan's poem, Mere Papa Ka Rumal. Now, Dr. Pannaji, you're up next.
Thank you. Thank you, Niharika. Thank you, Nadia. And of course, Manoj and Geeta, our dear friends. I thank you all and all the panelists. Here we go. I have published 10 volumes of Gujarati poetry and one short story collection called Flamingo. And 2 years ago, I published Astrologer Sparrow, which is published in Washington by Academia Press. And here is my collected poems called Videshini in Gujarati. So after all these collections, I still wonder, it's a miracle to me that I am a published poet. Because I always wanted to be a poet, but never wrote a single word in India till I came to this country. And it's not that I was not equipped, because my family my grandfather wrote a novel in 1888. My mother recited all kinds of poetry. My father had a press business. So we had intimate relations with all the literary people. And still, I did not write a single word in India. So something to do with America, something to do with Philadelphia, and that's made me write. I was here for 10 years and immensely unhappy for some personal reasons. And that's when I met Anne Sexton at the University of Pennsylvania. And I met her and I read her poems, and they were very transparent. She had everything and still unhappy, just like me. So that gave me a push to write. And if she can write, I had to say a lot of things. So that's when I began writing. So I started my career at very late age. And so here I'm continuing. So I'm going to read a poem in Gujarati first and then in English. Diwan Khana Ma. દિવાન ખાનાને વ્યવસ્થિત કરું છું ઘડી અહીં ઘડી તઈ વિવિધ ફેરફારથી વસ્તુનું મન પૂછી પૂછી ગોઠવણી કરું છું. સોફા અને લેમ્પને નવું સ્થાન આપ્યું, બારીના પડદા બદલી કાઢ્યા, જૂના ગાલીચાની જગ્યાએ નખાવી દીધી વોલ ટુ વોલ કાર્પેટ. સુશોભનને પ્રસન્ન થાય છે દિવાનખાનું, પણ સગળું બરાબર થાય છે ત્યારે જ છટકે છે મારું મન. આ બધામાં મને ક્યાં ગોઠવું? કેન્દ્ર શોધું છું જ્યાં હું સરખું બેસી શકું, પણ રસ્તો નિહાળતી હું તો ઊભી જ રહું છું, ઊભી જ રહું છું, ઊભી જ રહું છું. And the same poem in English called Placement. I reorganized my living room, asking each piece where it would like to be placed. I give a new spot to the sofa and the lamp, change the drapes, and replace the old rug with a wall-to-wall carpet. The living room, with its new decor, looks precise and proper. When everything is in place, I begin to wonder, where should I place myself? Where should I place myself? So I basically write in Gujarati because my creative process, I can express very well in Gujarati because I work with metaphors and images, and they're very difficult to bring it into English because I talk about gulmor and kesuda flowers, which are very difficult to translate into English because images are very difficult. I mean, we can translate the language, but not the images, especially the cultural context which we were talking about, and that's I deal with these languages, expressing in Gujarati and translating into English. Thank you.
Thank you, Panaji. That was beautiful. And I also noticed, speaking of why you write in Gujarati and you translate that into English, because when you recited your Gujarati poem, you did it from the heart, and the English you had to read. And that tells us that what comes out of the heart and then what is translated. But then translation in and of itself has a very important role in cultural understanding, in opening up our writing to the rest of the world and to bring the rest of the world's writing to us. So, which I think is a beautiful segue for me to go to Surinder Ji, because he is not only a writer and a poet, he's also a translator. So Surinder Ji, why don't you take our question and read something to us and tell us what you think?
Niharika, thanks for having me. I'm very pleased to be a part of this panel of very distinguished poets. I think the question we have to address is what is the language of poetry? And I feel, as other poets have also presented pieces of their own writing, I feel it is appropriate to ground our discussion. And one way of doing that would be for me to just write read one of my poems, and then just talk about and then draw some conclusions from there. So I published this poetry book, A Moment in the Universe, in 2006, and it had 38 poems. Most of them were love poems, but there were some other subjects also. So I want to read a poem called Memory. The poetic voice in this poem is that of someone who is missing somebody he loves. Okay, and here it goes. The white linen of silence has covered everything from doors to windows. Songs are like frozen ice. I don't hear any stringed instruments. I don't hear any sopranos sing. There is silence all around. Your memory is standing by my doorsteps, gathering dust layer by layer. The magic of the moonlight is falling, sparkle by sparkle, in the still waters of the lake outside. My eyes see through the darkness, beyond the shrouded trees, toward the metropolis flights, the metropolis of sounds. I have been exiled to this city of silence. The dust-laden corpse of your memories still stands by my doorsteps. So as you would have noticed, this poem is metaphoric. It uses a lot of metaphors. In fact, these short stanzas are built around one metaphor. So just to remind you again, in the first stanza, there is white linen of silence. In the second one, songs are frozen like ice. Third one, your memory is standing by my doorsteps. The magic of the moonlight is falling sparkle by sparkle. I see through the darkness, shrouded trees, metropolis of lights, metropolis sounds, city of silence, and the dust-laden corpse of your memories still stands at my doorsteps. So as you see, this is a short poem, but it was full of metaphors, okay? Now, I want to mention here one literary group, they were Russians. They became quite popular in 1930s. They were called Russian formalists, and they made great contributions to understanding of language and literature. And one of their famous assertions was that there are two kind of languages. There is a language of poetry and there is a language of prose, and two cannot be mixed. Now, this statement of theirs got a lot of attention, but if you look closely into this, it's a wrong statement. Why? Because, as we know, living in America, that Walt Whitman had repudiated their thesis several decades before they came on the scene. As we know, Walt wrote beautiful prose, which nowadays we call poetic prose, and he was recognized as a poet. So there is no strict boundary between prose and poetry, but there are some poems which are written in a metaphoric style. And in fact, it's true that some of the great poets, they have such mastery over metaphors that when they write poetry, they use a lot of metaphors, and it makes poetry interesting. But there is no rule like that your poem should be like that. You can write it. In fact, most of the people who are writing these days, they're writing in free verse, where there's liberal use of prose. So my poem is an example of a particular style of writing, that is metaphoric style. But I do not claim that this is the only way to write poetry. The language's poetry is not fixed in stone. Poet shapes style as well as the substance. He or she is no different from a sculptor. So I may have more to say about this. So Niharika, please go ahead.
Thank you, Surinder Dio. I think you also raised a very good point about the language of poetry and the language of prose, and how the Russians wrote and decided that there was a different language that had to be used for literary work than, for the spoken language or the colloquial language. But I think what's happening now is that we are having a new phenomenon develop, that's prose poetry, where people are writing. You can write prose, and you could maybe, change a few lines here and there you have a poem. So
Yes.
Language is evolving. Language is a very interesting living organism that all of us here have learned to manipulate in some way. Sometimes because we've had to, because we're all immigrants. And like Dr. Gandhi said, that he came to English later in life. And other times when once we have mastered it or want to learn more, then we like to manipulate it. And that's the beauty of language. And so now I'm going to bring us to Afsar Mohammad, who manipulates language from Hyderabadi Urdu to Telugu to English. So tell us, Afsar, how do you work with language?
Thank you so much, Niharika, Manojji, Nadia, and Snigdha, for everyone here. I am kind of privileged to me to be a panelist with this wonderful team. Basically, I want to touch upon two aspects. One is because Telugu is not that familiar language here, I just want to recite my poem, not the entire poem, but just one stanza in Telugu, and then translation in English. Fortunately, this is a poem translated by legendary poet Guljar into Hindi in his recent anthology of Indian poetry, Poem a Day. So the poem reads, Oka Sufi Sayantram. ఏమైందో ఆ మాసిన టోపీ, ప్యాంటు జేబుల్లోంచి కర్చీఫ్ ముక్క తీసి తలకి చుట్టాను. జుట్టు జూలు విదిలించకూడదు. సమాధి చుట్టూ బిగుసుకున్న తలుపులు ఇంకా తెరుచుకోలేదు. ఎదురుచూపులు అసర్ కోసం అజా పిలుపుతో పావురాలు ఆకాశం గూటిలోకి రెక్కలెగరేశాయి. పుట్టింటికి చేరుకున్న ఆనందం వాటికి చాన్నాళ్లకి. అసర్ నమాజ్ అయ్యింది. That was just the first stanza of the poem. But now I read the English version. This book is coming out this year. This title is Evening with a Sufi. I will never know the fate of my worn out cap. I took a handkerchief from my pocket and tied it on my head. It's not right for the human mane to sway. I had gone somewhere inside him. I couldn't come out. I had gone somewhere inside him into his grave. I couldn't come out. His memory is like a worn Arabic text. I'm afraid to open. I'm afraid that I will tear it. But once I made a pilgrimage there, how can this make sense? And I was leaving the shrine, something exploded into the cloud of sparrows. Then a flurry of severed wings. Everyone was running here and there, screaming. I ran into the shrine again, into the shrine's that pure silence. Now I watch a sparrow with its bleeding beak writing something on the grave, translating its pain. Where will I go now? There is a grave to dig inside me. This is actually in the memory of Wali Gujarati, whose grave was demolished during the riots in Gujarat in 2002. So in my world, because this poem particularly captures that movement of language, when I begin to document two languages that I inherit from my home culture. So this is very interesting for me because I'm a poet who basically challenges the centrality of the concept of mother tongue. Because I speak Urdu at home, I write in Telugu, which I consider as home language. So there is a mother tongue and there is a home tongue. And then now there is another language, Hindi. My father taught Hindi for more than 40 years. So I grew up listening, enjoying, celebrating the literatures from these three languages. And then most of my poetry actually represents that multilingual, multi-religious atmosphere. So that is why this title of the poem that is going to be out soon, Evening with a Sufi. That's actually the title was given by Gulzar Saheb himself. And then he is going to write a preface to this volume as well. I'm actually looking forward to that because this is an area that I am actually so like my research, my teaching, and then my everyday conversations, everything actually, they are actually connected to this idea of multi-religious identity. So I'm curious, like how language and religious identity and then literary identity, they go together, and then how they find an expression in your writing. And then the writing that actually, for me, poetry is a language of, as everyone said, images, symbols, and metaphors. It's a communication in images, symbols, and metaphors. So I know, we all know that this is not like an ordinary language, but still we are traveling to ordinary language using extraordinary tools. So that is how I pursue the question of language. So the entire journey for me is to translate that particular language of multiple identities into few sentences and bring it to the table. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Afsar. You know, if we were in person, after this, we could all go out for chai and discuss the concept of multiple identities and multiple linguistic identities. I have a multiple linguistic identity myself, and growing up in India and going to school, I was made fun of because I didn't have a mother tongue. And people would ask me, what is your mother tongue? And I didn't really, and that just meant, you know, what you spoke at home. But I had parents who spoke to each other in English. My mother and I speak to each other in English and Hindi and Bengali. My dad and I speak to each other in Hindi and some kind of Haryanvi or a Meerut dialect, and then my brother and I speak to each other in Hindi, and I speak to my friends from college in half Japanese and half Hindi, sometimes Bengali, with a few words of Russian. So I don't have one linguistic identity myself, and it's the day I show up and whoever is coming out of me that day. And as Dr. Mohan said, when you're enraged, you pick a particular language. When you remember your parents back home, then it's another language. When you are thinking about a time in school that was important to you, another language comes to mind. So we have a few minutes, and the audience is going to be asking us questions. But before we do that, there are a couple more questions that I would like to ask you individually. So I'm going to go back to Dr. Mohan now. And Dr. Mohan, you're a painter. And I have seen your work and I have read your poems. And I find that your poems exude a serenity about them. And there's this element of peace to them. They're very calming. Do you think this is because you're a painter? And that's a written manifestation of you as a painter? Could you share with us?
Actually, I really came to know myself much more during this pandemic time, during this last 2 years. And I realized that all these quarantine time when I was alone at home, I was really kind of just enjoying myself. I was sort of reflecting back to a lot of study. And also, I study Gita a lot. So I was finding myself a lot in peace, and I was trying to find peace through my environment, through my Gita study, and through everything. And life kind of moves on, and everything happens for some reason. So finally, I want to come to a conclusion, like, if we cannot help anything, we just have to try to do whatever we can help ourselves. So that is how. So I wrote a lot of poems on nature, how nature is, how it soothes me and stuff like that. So this is how I do that a lot. So I paint. Most of my paintings are kind of reflecting of that kind of peace kind of thing, peace. And then I write poems on that. So basically, that is actually my next project that I want to do. Write it's going to be like a canvas of words and colors or something like that. I haven't quite decided on the title. So I will, I do oil painting, I do pen and art. So I would have my painting and I have my corresponding or relevant, poem with that one. So that is what I do.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. That's a lovely, lovely visual. And I think pandemic times have brought out the artist in us. Some of us have baked lots and lots of banana bread. Some of us had sourdough starters. I never got into that. I should have maybe. And then, some of us started writing again, and I had that happen. So I'm grateful to have had that. We have a question that has come in from the audience. And I would like to actually offer this first to Dr. Gandhi and to Pannaji, which is, what are some of the words or phrases or emotions that you found most challenging to translate into English?
Is when I landed in this country. I was wearing a sari and, of course, a bindi and all that. And I was standing in a line to get my passport stamped. And there was a woman behind me, and she was accompanied by a child. And the child was looking at me, staring at me. And then finally, the child tells his mother, "Oh, look, mommy, see, her forehead is bleeding," referring to my bindi. So that is the most, that's when I felt that I was a woman, I was a foreigner. And I have included that image into several poems. But to translate that into that kanku, bindi is very hard to, it's out of context. You cannot explain that. And that is the most challenging part on me. part for me.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Dr. Gandhi, any thoughts on that?
Right. In my particular case, English has been extremely difficult for me to write creatively. As I told you, I came very late in my life in writing in English. In general, for a foreigner to write in English, one whose mother tongue wasn't in English, very, very few examples that I can think of. For example, Joseph Conrad, the great novelist, is one of those very few people whose mother tongue was not English, but still wrote beautifully in English. Nabokov is another example where he came also not originally from English, but nevertheless wrote beautifully in English. So in my particular case, I came very late in life in English. So the words that come natural to me, that mean so much. For example, I was writing a poem on Emerson, the great thinker, one of the pioneers of literary people in America. For him, the word I had was Vachaspati. I don't know how to translate that in English. I was also writing a word about a poem about Walt Whitman, and word that I used in my sonnet for him was Vaitalik. I don't know how to translate that in English. Or about Thoreau, the word that I used in my language was Aranyak. And it simply cannot translate that into English. I mean, I can find a word for it, but doesn't convey the meaning.
But you can't find the emotion for it.
Exactly right.
Yes.
So that's my particular problem.
I also have a question that's come in from Dr. Rupali Sarkar Gaur in Meerut, India, who says it was wonderful hearing poetry in so many languages. And she wants to know, do you feel more empowered when you write in your own tongue? And why is that? Let me start with Afsar, and then we can take it through the panel.
Thank you for the great question. Yes, I think my own story as a poet begins with writing poetry in English, which was published in journals like Illustrated Weekly. And then I switched to my home language, Telugu, for a particular reason that only my home language can express my real and sincere emotions in its own language. So there are two issues here. One is, of course, we all believe that poetry is an extraordinary language, but it is not true. Poetry is also ordinary language. We have a lot of poetry in ordinary language, in which we speak, in which we write, in which we communicate on daily basis. So my effort, being a poet in this home language who switched from English to Telugu, I felt that only by writing in my language, I can feel that power of words. So beyond that language, you can imagine certain level of power, but I feel like it's not a real power. So to arrive at that station of real power, we need to understand the diction, idiom, proverbs that we inherit from our home language. So everything together, they make a wonderful poetry, a wonderful poem. So that is, for me, it is a journey from extraordinary to ordinary. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, my untranslatable word used to always be jugar, but I think now it's going to be aranya. So that's going to be my example. But Surinderji, would you like to respond to this same question too? And then we have another question coming up.
Feelings and emotions are the core of a poem, because a poem has to move the reader, because the only way the reader is engaged and reader is involved, engaged emotionally, is the how the poet has expressed his own feelings, his or her own feelings and emotions. I used to believe for a very long time that you could do it in your own language and poetry cannot be translated. But starting with, say, early 2000, when I saw Coleman Barks' translation of Rumi. Rumi is very famous Persian poet. He's treated like a seer. His poetry in Persian is very difficult to translate. But Coleman Barks did an excellent job of translating his poetry. And also Pablo Neruda, who wrote in Spanish. He is the world's best-selling poet for many, many years. People read him in all languages. Some of his English translations are excellent. So that impacted me. And when I wanted to translate Ghalib, I hesitated for a long time. I couldn't do it. But Coleman Barks' translation of Rumi was a great inspiration for me. And I thought if he could do it for Rumi, I could do it for Ghalib. And that was a good starting point, because then I translated Mir Taqi Mir and many other Indian Urdu poets. So it is possible, but it takes a lot of effort. It takes really a lot of effort.
It does take effort, and I think there's a great example of a Kenyan poet who wrote in English as James Gugi, and then returned to his Gikuyu people and wrote in the Gikuyu tongue, and went back to his native name of Gugi wa Thiong'o. So I know we have another audience question that's come up. It's from Kavita Mohan in Bethesda, Maryland. And she's asking, and this is specifically for Dr. Meenakshi Mohan, when inspiration strikes you to write a poem, do you consciously decide which language you will write in, or does it just come to you? Is it a subconscious decision?
That's a very nice question. Actually, I think it would be it comes very naturally. For example, when I was writing about Mere Papa Ka Rumal, and when I looked at it, the whole scenery, the visual and everything came back, of my past life, and it just came naturally in my own language in Hindi. But when I'm so ingrained with English here, so when I was writing, going through this whole trauma about George Floyd and the Black Rights Movement, when I was writing those poems, it just came very naturally in English. So it just comes very naturally in both the languages. So I cannot, it depends on what I'm writing about and the circumstances when I have to write about it.
Thank you so much. I know we are coming up at the end of the hour. I have a burning question that I have been dying to ask Dr. Gandhi. You told me at one point that you started writing much later in life, even though you wrote poetry when you were a teenager. But then you had a love for words. And so there was this, how did the love for words become a love for numbers and then go back to being a love for words? What happened?
A lot happened. What had happened was that as a teenager, I wrote many, many poems, and I thought I was going to be a poet. And I wanted to major in literature in college. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, I could not do that. And I had to major in accounting, of all things, primarily to get a job. Unfortunately, in those days in Mumbai, it was extremely difficult to get a job. And I had a hell of a time getting settled in Mumbai. And during those early years in Mumbai, I was thoroughly disillusioned with literature. And I basically came to believe it has nothing to do with me in terms of being useful to me. Literature per se, poetry in particular, what does it do for me? All I need is a job. And I couldn't get that. So, but as you pointed out, I have love for the language, for the words, etc. It stayed with me. But when I came to this country and then settled down and went through various jobs, all the while being in accounting, and towards the end of my career as an accountant, the urge to do poems came back, and I say, am I ever going to be a poet or not? This is the time. So that is when I started writing poetry. The words came back, as I pointed out, words like Vachaspati, Aranyak, Vaitalik, all that were stored in my mind. And I wrote poems, basically still in Gujarati, because that's where I think I can do well compared to English. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad they came out. I think they came out of your heart rather than your mind, don't you think? We're going to wrap up soon, but I want to give our panelists an opportunity to let us know what we can expect to see from you all next. You have upcoming works, you have books. I know Surinder Ji, you have a book coming. Afsar, you have something coming. Panna Ji, Dr. Gandhi, Dr. Mohan. Let's hear it one by one, so our audience can go out and buy these books and get on Amazon or wherever books are sold and follow your work. Surinder Ji, why don't you start?
My book on Faz Ahmed Faz is coming. Actually, it should have come out last year, but because of the coronavirus, it has been delayed. Hopefully, it will come out next month. It's being published by Rupa Publications. But just I want to take 1 or 2 minutes to
Yes.
give you an anecdote which very beautifully summarizes the question of what is the language of poetry. There is a well-known American poet. His name is, he actually passed away in mid-50s, Wallace Stevens. Wallace Stevens is kind of ranked among the leading American poets. So he wrote many poems, and he had a friend called Charlie. So one day, Wallace Stevens and Charlie, they were having a normal conversation as we have as friends. Then out of nowhere, Charlie said something. And this is what Charlie said. Mr. Stevens, I just can't understand your stuff. If I had to choose between you and Robert Service, I would take Robert Service because I can understand Robert Service. Robert Service is the name of some unknown poet. So poet's friend is telling him face to face, I have to read your poem because you are my friend, but sorry to tell you, I don't understand the meaning of that. The reply which Wallace Stevens gave is classic. He said, Charlie, it isn't necessary that you understand my poetry or any poetry. It is only necessary that the writer understands it. I understand it, and that's all the thing which is necessary, nothing else. That means in the end, we can talk about the language, we can talk about techniques. Ultimately, it is a poet who has the final word, because the poet, these days I read poems which has mathematical equations built into it. So poets are doing a lot of innovations. So language of poetry is a very open question, and eventually it is a choice of the poet. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I see a collaboration coming up between the accountant and the mathematical equations guy on some kind of collaborative poetry there. But
well, I would say that I basically I'm concentrating on prose now. I wrote an autobiography called Ek Ajana Gandhi Ni Atmakatha. This is my autobiography of my journey from where I was to Washington, D.C. And then I've turned to writing in English, and this is my memoir, Still the Promised Land. And I'm trying to do a sequel to that, because given what has been happening in America lately, people often ask me, is it still the promised land? So I am basically looking at that question and trying to answer it first for myself and then for the reader.
Thank you so much. Dr. Mohan, did you have anything to say before we wrap up?
Well, I just basically want to say that I'm actually working on several projects. One, collecting my book of poems, both separately in English and Hindi. And then I'm working on two children's books. One which is going to be in sort of in rhyme kind of thing, a story. I'm looking for an illustrator. And then the last book that I'm also working is the book of poems and my artwork that I just talked about, the canvas of the colors of and birds. So quite a few projects going on. I'm very busy.
Wonderful. Afsar, what about your upcoming work on Sufism?
Actually, I have two books coming out this year and next year. One is the selected poems from my this big volume published in Telugu. We just selected 45 poems, and then this will be out soon from like one of the presses from US. The other one is I am working on monograph, particularly about history of Hyderabad and its literature. So particularly after 1950s, how Hyderabad emerged as a literary center, and then who were like agents and participants of this literary like sphere. So that is actually, I am done with manuscript, just signed a contract, and then it is going to come out hopefully next year. So these two are basically on my table right now.
Wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you. And
Well,
then I'm collaborating with one of my friends with like 100 Sufi poems from Telugu into English. So that is going to be a long-term project. I'm not going to finish it that soon.
Well, I encourage our audience to please find your work online. I think this has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you all very much. Thank you to the delightful panel for leaving us with more questions than answers sometimes, and that little something makes us want more. And I encourage everybody to share this with friends and family. It's available to view after the fact if you weren't able to make the live event. But, you know, in closing, I would like to acknowledge that it is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. The month of May is AAPI Heritage Month in the United States. And I want to acknowledge our panelists as being pioneers. You were the first ones here. You came before us. You came before Afsar and I landed here. And to you, I am grateful. I am so grateful to you for having come here, for having struggled and not quit, for having raised children, for having created opportunities for us, for making us who we are and letting us dream and knowing that we can be anything, even the Vice President of the United States. So it is your generation who has helped us be who we are. And to you, my great debt of thanks personally. So thank you all very much. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to Manoj for creating this event, and for everyone behind the scenes. Snigdha, thank you for keeping us on track and feeding us the questions. And to everyone who was here watching, thank you very much. And we will see you again soon. So namaskar and good night from Washington, D.C.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Niharika and team.